The neck is divided into two main regions, anterior and posterior. Posterior region of the neck corresponds to the borders of the trapezius muscle and includes the suboccipital region here on top. Under the trapezius you can find other muscles of the back: splenius capitis, splenius cervicis, semispinalis capitis, levator scapula, and others. Muscles and skin of the posterior region are supplied by cutaneous branches of posterior rami of cervical spinal nerves. The anterior region of neck is additionally divided into anterior and lateral triangles by the sternocleidomastoid muscle. The sternocleidomastoid is a broad, strap-like muscle that has two heads. The rounded tendon of the sternal head attaches to the manubrium, and the thick, fleshy clavicular head attaches to the superior surface of the medial third of the clavicle. The two heads of the sternocleidomastoid are separated inferiorly by a space, visible superficially as a small triangular depression, the lesser supraclavicular fossa. The heads join superiorly as they pass obliquely upward toward the cranium. The superior attachment of the sternocleidomastoid is the mastoid process of the temporal bone and the superior nuchal line of the occipital bone. The investing layer of the deep cervical fascia splits to form the sheet of the sternocleidomastoid. The muscle is innervated by accessory nerve. Unilateral contraction of the sternocleidomastoid turns the head to opposite side. Bilateral contraction elevates the head. The anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid covers the carotid arteries, the internal jugular vein, and deep cervical lymph nodes. It also overlaps the thyroid gland. The deep surface of the posterior border is related to the cervical plexus of nerves, the phrenic nerve, and the upper part of the brachial plexus. Now let's review the anterior triangle of the neck. The hyoid bone, which is here, separates the suprahyoid and infrahyoid regions. The suprahyoid muscles are superior to the hyoid and connect it to the cranium. The suprahyoid group of muscles includes the mylohyoid, geniohyoid, stylohyoid, and digastric muscles. As a group, these muscles constitute the substance of the floor of the mouth and elevate the hyoid and larynx in relation to swallowing and tone production. Each digastric muscle has two bellies joined by an intermediate tendon that descends toward the hyoid and is connected to its greater horn by a fibrous sling. The first belly attaches to the mastoid process of temporal bone, and the second to the body of mandible. Both bones feature digastric fossa. Here they are, the digastric fossa on the mandible and digastric fossa on the temporal bone. The mylohyoid, geniohyoid, and stylohyoid muscles connect the mylohyoid line and inferior mental spine of mandible and the styloid process of the temporal bone to the hyoid, respectively. So here they are, the mylohyoid, geniohyoid, and stylohyoid muscles. Between the right and left anterior bellies of the digastric muscle, the submental triangle is distinguished. The floor of the submental triangle is formed by two mylohyoid muscles, which meet in a median fibrous raphe. The apex of the submental triangle is at the mandibular symphysis, the site of union of two halves of the mandible during infancy. The base of the submental triangle is formed by the hyoid bone. This triangle contains several small submental lymph nodes and small veins that unite to form the anterior jugular vein. Submandibular triangle, also known as a digastric triangle, is a glandular area between the inferior border of the mandible and the anterior and posterior bellies of the digastric muscle. The floor of the submandibular triangle is formed by the mylohyoid and hyoglossus muscles. The submandibular gland nearly fills this triangle. Submandibular lymph nodes lie on each side of submandibular gland and along the inferior body of the mandible. The hypoglossal nerve, which provides motor innervation to the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles of the tongue, passes into the submandibular triangle. Here it is. As does the nerve to the mylohyoid, a branch of the trigeminal nerve, which also supplies the anterior belly of the digastric. The facial artery and vein and the submental artery, that is the branch of the facial artery, pass here as well. Here they are. The infrahyoid muscles, often called strap muscles because of their ribbon-like appearance, are inferior to the hyoid. These four muscles anchor the hyoid, sternum, clavicle, and scapula, and depress the hyoid and larynx during swallowing and speaking. The infrahyoid group of muscles are arranged in two planes: a superficial plane made up of the sternohyoid and omohyoid, and a deep plane composed of the sternothyroid and thyrohyoid muscles. Like the digastric, the omohyoid has two bellies, superior and inferior, united by an intermediate tendon. The facial sling for the intermediate tendon connects it to the clavicle. The sternothyroid is wider than the sternohyoid, under which it lies. The sternothyroid covers the lateral lobe of the thyroid gland. Its attachment to the oblique line of the lamina of the thyroid cartilage, immediately superior to the gland, limits upward extension of the enlarged thyroid. The thyrohyoid is the continuation of the sternothyroid muscle, running superiorly from the oblique line of the thyroid cartilage to the hyoid. So let's review the muscles of the infrahyoid region. They are the sternohyoid, sternothyroid, and thyrohyoid. They are the omohyoid, thyrohyoid, sternothyroid, and sternohyoid. The carotid triangle is a vascular area bounded by the superior belly of the omohyoid, posterior belly of the digastric, and the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. This triangle is important because the common carotid artery ascends into it. Its pulse can be palpated by compressing it lightly against the transverse processes of the cervical vertebra. At the level of the superior border of the thyroid cartilage, the common carotid artery divides into the internal and external carotid arteries. The neurovascular structures in the carotid triangle are surrounded by the carotid sheath. The carotid arteries lies medially, the internal jugular vein laterally, and the vagus nerve posteriorly within this sheath. Superiorly, the common carotid is replaced by the internal carotid artery. Many deep cervical lymph nodes lie along the carotid sheath and internal jugular vein. The muscular triangle is bounded by the superior belly of the omohyoid muscle, the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid, and the medial plane of the neck. This triangle contains the infrahyoid muscles and viscera, trachea, thyroid, and parathyroid glands. The posterior triangle is also known as a lateral region of the neck. It is bounded anteriorly by the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid, posteriorly by the anterior border of the trapezius, inferiorly by the middle third of the clavicle between the trapezius and the sternocleidomastoid. The region is covered by skin and subcutaneous tissues containing the platysma. The floor of the lateral cervical region is usually formed by the prevertebral fascia of line 5 muscles: splenius capitis, levator scapulae, posterior scalene, middle scalene, and anterior scalene muscles. The anterior scalene is an important landmark of the neck. The subclavian vein The major venous channel draining the upper limb passes anterior to it, while the roots of the brachial plexus and subclavian artery pass just behind and laterally. Here they are, the subclavian vein and subclavian artery, and these yellow structures you see here are the branches of the brachial plexus. For a more precise localization of structures, the lateral cervical region is divided into a large occipital triangle superiorly and a small omoclavicular triangle inferiorly by the inferior valley of the omohyoid. The occipital triangle is so called because of the occipital artery appears in its apex. The most important nerve crossing the occipital triangle is the spinal accessory nerve. The omoclavicular or subclavian triangle is indicated on the surface of the neck by the supraclavicular fossa. The inferior part of the external jugular vein crosses this triangle superficially. The subclavian artery lies deep in it. These vessels are separated by the investing layer of deep cervical fascia. Because the third part of the subclavian artery is located in this region, the omoclavicular triangle is often called the subclavian one.